Welcome everyone. Today is Tuesday, July 31st. I'm very pleased to have two expert guests in the area of Malaysia flight MH370. Let me add Captain McConnell. I've got David Hawkins with me. And of course, these two gentlemen are the principals in the world's best known global cloud-centric crime-solving unit, Able Danger. David, Field, how are you, gentlemen?
Very well, thank you, Jason.
Field, have we got you?
Well, hang on just a second. I have a little problem, but it'll be handled in 10 seconds.
No problem. I think we can wait.
So if somebody asks me if I'm here, yes, I'm here.
Okay. I don't have video on you guys. David, let's give it a try. Let's see if the bandwidth can handle it. I think people do enjoy seeing you gentlemen as you share with us this information regarding the official report that has just come out. It's the International, what is it? The International Association of, International Coalition of something that investigates these air disasters. And they've issued an extensive report. This is a report that I'm going to make available to our Patreon sponsors. And of course, people can find the report. It's a publicly available report on the internet, but as a convenience and a way to say thank you to those that sponsor the channel and sponsor the show, I'll post that up there. The report's just come out, and I don't think too many viewers of Crowdsource the Truth or Able Danger will be surprised to learn that the conclusions of this report are that it's inconclusive. They've determined that they don't know what happened exactly. Isn't that right, gentlemen?
It's pathetic, but maybe Field can go from a pilot angle as to why this is such a ridiculous state of affairs, and I just go as a forensic economist. I bet the 911 Commission report weighs about the same amount as this useless piece of documentation. Over to you.
Field, have we got you?
Yeah, you've got me, and do you have video on me as you requested?
We don't yet, but we can go with a still photo for now. I've got that, of course.
Okay, well, I've got the button pushed, and I'm showing my videos live, but it doesn't matter. Three quick responses. I think the bottom line is, as you were talking about the fact that the final report was inconclusive, I was filling in the blanks ahead of your speaking those words, and the exact word I use is inconclusive. Right. But I think it's inconclusive because of a big lie, and I think the big lie, and I think I'm in a fairly unique position to state this unequivocally, because I traveled to Kuala Lumpur and I interfaced with the elements of the good government. In other words, the government administration that preceded Najib regime. And I know for a fact what they know. But see, it doesn't matter if I know for a fact what they know or not. The world knows for a fact what they know, because the world knows that in October of 2016, I believe, somebody may have to check that date, Matthias Chang was put in prison for speaking the words remote control. And see, they're soft pedaling that, meaning the nation of Malaysia. They're soft pedaling remote control by suggesting that an outside entity took control of the aircraft between Agari, which I think is spelled I-G-A-R-I intersection, and Bitod, B-I-T-O-D intersection. And the suggestion that they're allowing people's minds to be poisoned with is that it was manual control from within the aircraft. And nobody in the world can prove me wrong that it was electronic control from outside the aircraft. And it's really a pity for the people that did this, that they destroyed the evidence. And here's a soundbite for you, Jason. The evidence of Malaysia 370's electronic commandeering between Agari and Bitod intersection was spoliated or destroyed partially over Donetsk, Ukraine on the 17th of July of 2014. So by destroying the evidence to try to protect themselves, I believe that they've walked themselves into a trap, because the preceding administration of Malaysia felt so strongly that Matthias Chang should not utter the words remote control. They put him in prison. As you may or may not know, because things are happening at a frantic pace, shortly after they put him in prison, I communicated to Malaysia that if they didn't release him very soon, that I would travel to New York City or to Washington, D.C., and give a voluntary deposition to the FBI. And the reason I picked those two cities is there was a sum of somewhere between 681 million and 700 million that traveled from Saudi Arabia to a bank in New York. And I don't know the bank. It could have been HSBC, one of the favorite banks of Comey, and my sister, by the way. Or it could have been Chase Manhattan or J.P. Morgan or any of those. I don't know, and it doesn't matter. People that are investigators and people who get paid to solve this, they do know the money went from Saudi Arabia. They do know it went through New York. They do know it went through the IMDb fund, or whatever that fund in Malaysia is, and they do know that approximately 681 million went into the pocket of Najib Razak. Those are established facts. But I think the three things that I'm focusing on, and as both of you guys know, David Hawkins and Jason Goodman, I'm working on a script. And the script that I'm working on is for a DVD documentary, docudrama that's coming out Veterans Day weekend. And the title of that docudrama is Where Did MH370 Go? Here's the three things that, after you called me this morning, Jason, and after David committed to this time together, the three things that I find most significant from my perspective is who had custody of the airframe and the corpses. And what I mean by that is the airframe is known to have landed safely at Diego Garcia at 0651 on the morning of 8 March 2014. Okay, so who had the custody of that airframe? I believe, but it's not up to me to adjudicate. It is up to the ICAO, which I think is one of the most corrupt organizations in the world, and we'll talk about that later if you have any interest. But the custody of the airframe, which ICAO should be concerned with, there's very few there's very few nations which are represented on Diego Garcia. It is a U.S. military base that is leased from the United Kingdom. So there's two nations that are implicated in the custody of the airframe. For those with inquiring minds, the airframe in question is 9 Mike Romeo Oscar, 9MMRO. Interesting side note for people that really like details is that airframe, 9M-MRO, was a notorious hangar queen. Hangar queen is a term that pilots use to talk about aircraft that are so unreliable they seldom get pulled out of the hangar to go fly revenue. Well, 9M MRO was a hangar plane. It made an average of 7 flights, give or take, and I would allow Malaysia Airlines the opportunity to correct me if I'm wrong.
Now, Field, let me just address some of the points you're bringing up, because it's a lot of very good information. First thing I want to talk about is I did find this article right here from Japan Times that says Saudi Arabia confirms that the royals gave 681 million to Malaysia's Najib, and they've publicly confirmed this according to the Japan Times. And that's a lot of money, 681 million. They're countering accusations that the money was siphoned from the heavily indebted state investment fund, IMDb. Saudi Arabian foreign minister called the money a genuine donation. Why would they be donating so much? It doesn't seem to say that it's been given to Malaysia. It says it's been given to Najib.
Can I address that?
Please.
You're in New York City, correct?
Yes.
if a yellow taxi cab drove by your apartment and dropped off 681 million, offering you to put out some false news. I know you wouldn't do it, Jason. At least I believe you wouldn't do it, and I'll fight that battle until I'm dead. I believe you would not do it. But a lot of people for 681 million would put out a false narrative. Now, in the persecution or the prosecution or both of Malaysia 370, one entity in the world made $16.5 billion. And we'll describe that entity here next. But the point is, if a taxi cab drove by and there was let's just say there was a Arabian named Shake Your Booty in the back of the taxi cab, and he had a personal courier run up a check to you for for 681 million. And yet in the account that he had, that he wrote the check out of, there was 16.5 billion. That Shake Your Booty in the back of the yellow taxi cab would have only diminished his profit or his balance of 16.5 billion down to 15.619 billion, which is still a lot of money. And this is exactly what happened, because on the morning of the 8th of March of 2014, when Malaysia 370 was electronically commandeered between I can't remember, Ajari and Baitad. There are two intersections right there where the aircraft turned left and went away. But there was 16.5 billion made because 4 of the passengers, and on that aircraft there were 227 passengers and 12 crew members. Of the 227 passengers, 20 of them were employees of Freescale, which used to be called Motorola. And those four out of the 20 shared in the patent, which had been applied for but not yet granted. And the 5th whole name on that patent was Rothschild. So what I'm suggesting is there's a Rothschild out there that made $16.5 billion, and he could easily afford to give 681 million to Najib Razak, who was the corrupt prime minister of the former administration. They had an election, I believe it was May of this year, and I think he was shocked that he got ousted, and his replacement was Tun Dr. Mahathir Mohamad, who had been the prime minister of Malaysia from 1981 to 2003. So I think you right there can have a money chain that can be proven, and the logic, I don't think, can be unproven. I don't think anybody can prove that Rothschild did not cause 681 million to go into the back pocket, front pocket, or the purse of the wife of Najib Razak. So let's stop there, and you guys respond to that. I've got 2 more points to bring up later.
David, what do you say about this? I know your process really focuses on the patents, and this is, I think, what traditionally has been the powerhouse team of Able Danger when Field and David get together. The two I've come to know over the past year are so vastly different in their approach to these things, but I find it extremely complementary. David, what would you say about Field's information there? David, have we got you?
He needs to turn his microphone on.
Field knows that I'm a little absent-minded. I mute myself in order not to cough into the earpiece. And anyway, So Field and I, it's really amazing how we come from different directions, but I think the word is complementary. But we have a very similar objective, which is to bring the bad guys to justice. And what intrigues me from the patent, going into the patent office and seeing if any of the descriptions of the patent would allow you to configure a crime scene that fits the reality. So, for example, on 9/11, on a meeting of the 47th floor, there was a meeting of shareholders, hosted, I believe, by Wilbur Ross, who had just left a 25-year career with N.M. Rothschild and Sons Limited, which incidentally is the investment banker for Donald Trump. and Queen Elizabeth II. So when we talk about Rothschild making a great deal of money, one of the things that intrigues me is not so much whether they're making a great deal of money, but whether they are extorting concessions from the President of the United States and Queen Elizabeth II. But that's by the by. On the 47th floor on the morning of 9/11, there was a meeting of Serco shareholders, probably hosted by Wilbur Ross, their investment banker, and apparently engaged in what is known as death pool betting. The interesting fact about the shareholders is 10 of those shareholders, including BNY Mellon, are what is known as global custodians. And they would have had, on the morning of 9/11, about $100 trillion of assets under management. And with money like that, you can actually squirt significant hundreds of millions of dollars at a favored target, if you will. And it's effectively a money laundering because it's such a huge amount of money. So I totally support Field in the belief that that kind of money was paid to various corrupt people in Malaysia. But the intriguing thing is, amongst those shareholders of Serco, including the 10 global custodians, are 3 sovereign or state or national governments, one being the United Kingdom, and the second being Saudi Arabia, and the third being Singapore. So Saudi Arabia had a representative, I'm assuming, on the 47th floor of the North Tower on the morning of 9/11, placing a significant amount of money in arbitrage or hedge funds that would have resulted, provided they had insider knowledge of the time of the hit or the body counts, vast amounts of money being squirted at a criminal organization embedded within the Serco Corporation. Over to you.
Wow. So basically, these are self-funding operations that, because of this death pool betting, they're able to attract very high stakes. I mean, it's difficult for the average person to really conceive of this, but we're talking about royals from around the world who consider human life as the average person might consider an ant.
And not just royals, people like Hillary Clinton and the Clinton Foundation, and I believe Michelle Obama and the Chicago outfit. So they don't have to be royals, but of course what royals do is they attract sort of hangers-on who would like to bathe in that royal glow, if you will. But it's very interesting. What you've really got here is a liaison between a global criminal organization, which I like to call Con Air SWAT Team Network, founded by Field's sister around the 1985 period, an intellectual elite, and global bankers. Over to you.
Right. And of course, we've heard many times about how Christine Marcy was pivotal in the foundation of what's known as Con Air, the JPATS service that is run by the U.S. Marshals. And it's always intriguing, David, when you talk to us about not Wilbur Ross, but this guy Jerome Lemmel has a number of patents with regard to tracking prisoners, which do seem remarkably coincidental. Prisoner tracking and warning system. It does fit together like pieces of a puzzle. Now, before we go back to some of Field's other points, I was looking for this Freescale semiconductor patent. Do you know how I can find that?
Well, they have a vast array of patents, and let me give a different spin on the murder of the 20 Freescale semiconductor people. I believe there were 12 Malays and 8 Chinese, or the other way around. And what was going on between Freescale and Motorola, I think Freescale had a lot of patents, or vice versa, in Motorola's radio communication systems that would have been very, very useful if you wanted to covertly communicate between the SWAT teams in New York on the morning of 9/11 without Americans in general, and quite possibly the chain of command that goes to the Pentagon's U.S. Navy Command Center, without them being aware of it. So what I think the Freescale people who died in that MH370, or its sequel in MH17 in the Ukraine, is this was a warning to Freescale. Don't mess with Serco's patent monopoly. Now, Serco doesn't have a patent monopoly, but effectively, because it has agents in the United States Patent and Trademark Office, and they stretch back to the time when Serco was called RCAGB, 1929, when RCA, for example, would have taken out a patent on the cavity magnetron and the proximity fuse around the 1940 period. What happens there is that Serco or slash RCA has custody of the United States Patent and Trademark Office, which gives it the opportunity, in combination with the British Patent Office, to go in and do what I do or did, on a regular basis. See if I can clip together the various patented devices to create an integrated system that basically fits the signature of the crime. And I think I've found the meta patent, and Freescale is just one of the components of the meta patent. The meta patent for me is known as a training system for AWACS weapons directors that was taken out by SWRI. I think that's Southwest Research Institute. And this is the patent that, amazingly enough, allows weapons directors, unknown and not necessarily cleared from a security point of view, to switch from a simulation, as was being done, for example, in Amalgam Virgo on the 1st and 2nd of June of 2001, to a live fire performance, which was done with Global Guardian on 911. So that those weapons directors can actually interface, and it may very well be a constraint that Serco says, you don't patent anything in the terms of military communications or C4I, or I think they're up to C6I now, which includes cyber and crypto. You don't patent anything unless it's compatible with the AWACS weapons directors, which would actually allow an AWACS system to take MH370 along those ad hoc waypoints, and Phil can tell you what an ad hoc waypoint is, along to whatever destination they had in mind from a spot fixing and death pool gambling point of view. Over to you.
It's fascinating. We're looking at that AWAC patent right now, and I'm having considerable difficulty locating this Freescale semiconductor patent. I'm going to keep looking for it. It's interesting to note that I know I don't consider this a reliable source, but the self-proclaimed kings of debunking, Snopes.com, has this article that claims, talking about Malaysia Air 370 patent conspiracy. Was Malaysia Airlines MH370 made to disappear so one party could gain control over a multi-owned patent? And it says false. So I don't know. This was posted on Facebook, talking about how Freescale Semiconductor owns 1/5 of the patent, and then it names the Chinese scientists that own the rest of it. It also says that Freescale is owned by something called Blackstone. Are you guys aware of that?
Yeah, Blackstone is one of the largest private equity groups in the world, and Blackstone has had a critical role in the 911 attack, because it bought the mortgage on building number 7 from the Teachers Pension Fund, TIAA. Its full name, I believe, was TIAA CREF, College Retirement Equity Fund. And at the time, the chairman of the Blackstone Group was one Peter Peterson, which is another interesting story, because we believe, or at least I believe, I think Phil probably agrees,
You've
and
convinced
maybe
me.
we've discussed that in the past, that he might have taken a patented Bell & Howell tripod and stabbed Valerie, what's the surname? It suddenly escaped me. Valerie, the murder of the girl in Chicago.
Yeah.
What was the surname?
I don't recall.
David,
Okay.
you're not talking about Valerie Jarrett, are you?
No. She was killed in the 50s or 60s.
Percy.
Percy.
Yeah,
right.
Valerie Percy.
Yes. Well, I've found this article here on Blackstone.com talking about Freescale Semiconductor reaches an agreement with private equity consortium in $17.6 billion transaction. And this may well be The merger agreement between who? Blackstone Group. Yes, the consortium is led by Blackstone Group, which includes the Carlyle Group, which we know is Frank Carlucci and George H.W. Bush, notorious financial entity that is linked to all kinds of things. People have discussed the possibility that the Carlyle Group was trading in natural resource futures in the collapsing Soviet Union, and that the maturation of those futures was to happen on September 12th, 2001, and that Cantor Fitzgerald handled a lot of that. There was quite a bit of talk about that transaction in a documentary film that I saw called Anatomy of a Great Deception. So that's interesting that this Blackstone entity shares the name of a fake intelligence organization that operates on YouTube and proliferates false evidence to try to control public opinion as related to unsolved crimes like the Las Vegas October 1st shooting. I don't know if these names are coincidental, but it does indeed seem that Blackstone, which includes the Carlyle Group, owns Freescale Semiconductor.
Well, can I just mention, you mentioned Frank Carlucci?
Yes.
And this comes back to this fascinating woman, the sister of Field, Christine Marcy. She joined, Field will correct me if I got the year wrong, but she joined the Office of Economic Opportunity in something like 1969, and her first three bosses were Donald Rumsfeld, Dick Cheney, and Frank Carlucci. Now, going back, that's quite a little suite of people that would have inside knowledge of Christine Marcy, perish the thought, or vice versa. But Christine Marcy, I believe, has been running a pedophile entrapment racket from a very early age. Now, Field will tell you, and I hope I'm not being nasty to Field's sister, but she has the most obscure and weird career structure where she's occupied key roles in something like 10 major government agencies, including setting up or privatizing the U.S. National Visa Center in 1994 to Serco, which would, of course, allow Serco to bring in the Al-Qaeda sleeper cells. And in 1994, Al-Qaeda with bin Laden had an office in London. So this is a very weird woman. So when she started or bought the first Boeing 727 for the U.S. Marshals Prisoner Transportation Service, one of the things that she did is in December 1988, she called her brother, Field, and asked him how she would handle a mutiny of prisoners, presumably on this U.S. Marshals Boeing 727. And he told her to drone the aircraft. Now, it looks like one of the patents that was taken out by Boeing in the 1980s, and I'll read it to you, maybe you can pop it up on your screen there, is the Boeing company's Intervention Flight Management System. Priority date 1986, and it was granted as U.S. patent 481123OA. And it's my belief that what Christine Marcy did after chatting with Field McConnell is she went off to her various colleagues in the senior executive service, let's say in the Department of Commerce that controlled the patent office, and said to them, well, my brother's told me how to handle a prisoner mutiny, but what happens if she's playing a double-edged game, if that's the right word, where actually what she wanted was to get access to the technology that would support a prisoner mutiny. That is to say, prisoners being tracked by Jerome Lemelson's patent tracking system could actually be used to launch an attempted coup d'etat on 911. Just a thought. Over to you.
Well, it's an interesting thought. And again, I find it fascinating that so many people who send me emails and don't seem nearly as knowledgeable to me as you gentlemen like to try to tell me that perhaps these are fantastic, wild claims, but yet when we look at all these patents and we look at all these companies that seem to be involved with one another, it's a very compelling argument, this prisoner tracking and warning system, and of course all of the things that we're hearing about the flight intervention management system. I mean, what is the difference field between an intervention flight management system and the Boeing Honeywell uninterruptible autopilot?
Absolutely nothing. How's that for a short answer?
Yeah, same thing.
And let me tell you why they created the intervention flight management system. Back in the old days, humans could hijack airliners. And when the humans could hijack airliners, Boeing and Honeywell and General Electric, and by the way, I just mentioned three companies, Boeing, Honeywell, and General Electric. Do you think it would be irresponsible of me at this point to tell you which one of those three is almost 100% responsible for their collective criminal activity?
No, I think it would be good.
General Electric. They once had a CEO named Jeffrey Immelt.
Yes.
Yes, and when he was the CEO, he had the highest corporate paid life insurance policy in the United States of America. And it's my well thought out opinion that the reason he was so highly insured is because he was so highly involved in 9/11, and more importantly, in the eventual unsuccessful cover-up attempts of 9/11. The Boeing uninterruptible autopilot is in fact a General Electric component that was put in Boeing airliners at the factory in Everett, Washington, starting in 1995. And the Boeing, I'm going to give them a little slack because I believe it's well-deserved. I don't believe that Boeing, at the corporate level, Boeing Aircraft Corporation, traded on the New York Stock Exchange, I do not believe that the management of Boeing knew what was truly in the General Electric component. Now, just for those people out there that say, David and Field don't know what they're talking about, well, good. Let them react to this. The General Electric component, which is put in Boeing E&E compartments, which are directly below the flight deck, or as we used to say, cockpit.
Right.
We can't say cockpit anymore. But the General Electric component, which is referred to wrongfully in an obfuscatory manner, it's called the Boeing uninterruptible autopilot, but it's a GE part. And Jeffrey Immelt knew that it was put on Ames-C, the Ames-C rack, or you can also call it the Ames, AIMS, rack C. That's the physical location of the Boeing uninterruptible autopilot. And I've got some airline pilot friends that don't have enough IQ, where if IQ is dynamite, they couldn't blow their nose. And they say, well, Field, why don't you cause every Boeing airliner to be shut down so they can be inspected? I don't have that power. The only power I have is sharing the truth. And Jeffrey Immelt appears to be on the other team because not only was he in charge of GE when they provided the Boeing uninterruptible autopilot to Boeing, but he also participated in at least one movie to cover up the truth of 9/11. There were two movies that came out. One was United 93, I believe, and the other was Flight 93. And GE had a large stake in one of those movies, if not both.
Wow.
Now, when I was over in England, not England, I've been to England so many times, I think I lived there. But when I was down in Malaysia talking to the previous administration who issued the, I would say, feloniously incomplete report yesterday, and the reason I say felonious is I think misprision of wrongful death of 293 people is certainly a felony. But I was told by one of the four people I met that the issue of Malaysia 370 would be the world's first $1 trillion lawsuit. And I asked this gentleman, I said, well, who would be the defendant against the lawsuit brought by either Malaysia Airline Systems, MAS, or both? And he said, Boeing. And I said, well, then you would find me on the opposite side of the courtroom because Boeing, they were tricked or hoodwinked by General Electric. Now, I'm going to go back to something David's very knowledgeable of, and I'm sure you've heard of it. But on 9/11, the players that put on 9/11 were all members of something called the Federal Bridge Certification Authority, FBCA, and General Electric was on there. And several banks were on there, and several governments were on there. But by changing the names, for instance, when RCA 1929 became RCA GB, which became blah, 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 which became Circle. I just held up a coffee cup about 15 minutes ago that says Republic Airlines. I'll hold it up again. But Republic Airlines became Northwest Airlines, which became Delta Airlines. And every time these corporations, which, by the way, corporations were illegal in the United States prior to sometime in the latter half of the 1800s, I believe, these corporations keep changing their names to hide the trail of evidence. But they're not getting away with it because the people at the head of these corporations are no more intelligent than my sister, Christine Marcy. Christine Marcy and Hillary Clinton are now being blamed. This is going sideways a little bit, but are either of you gentlemen, David Hawkins or Jason Goodman, aware that Koch Brothers Industries, that's spelled K-O-C-H, they just held their annual meeting and get together in Colorado Springs, Colorado over this past weekend. Were either of you guys aware of that?
No.
Okay, it may not be significant, but Koch brothers are also now disengaging from the Republican Party, and they're sucking up to the Democrat Party. This is in today's news. Well, I live in Wisconsin, and one of the biggest, that was really fast, Jason, you're good. One of the biggest pawns, P-A-W-N-S, one of the biggest pawns of the Koch brothers is the governor of Wisconsin. His name is Scott Walker. So, and by the way, the Koch brothers also own a great deal of the control mechanism of Minnesota. There's a lot of natural resources up here, and the Koch brothers do not like the fact that Donald Trump is really taking care of business. So they've decided, it appears, that they were going to support Democratic nominees to try to reduce the power, this is my opinion, of Donald Trump. I think they're wasting their time. I think the truth is going to devour the Koch brothers, and the Koch brothers have stood behind Scott Walker, who towards the end, I think halfway through his senior year at Marquette University in Milwaukee, was he elected to remove himself from that school after an image of him laying in female lingerie on top of a Nazi flag, and he was just scantily clad. I mean, this is the type of compromised fools that the United States shadow government has been using since Scott Walker was a midterm senior at Marquette. Wow. And I'm sure, go ahead, over to you.
No, continue. I'm just shocked by that.
Oh, don't be shocked. I published the picture many times. It's on the internet. I'm not suggesting you publish it, but if you were to, I call him cockroach, K-O-C-H-R-O-A-C-H, and if you were to Google cockroach plus Scott Walker plus Field McConnell, I'm sure it would come up, but it's not important. And just for your first-time listeners, I don't have any ego involved in this. I didn't wake up one day and say, I want to talk about all the evil in America. But my life changed dramatically on the 4th of December of 2006. Yeah, isn't that a lovely picture for a governor of a state?
It's quite shocking, I have to say. I don't know that too many people have seen this, but there he is. What is the explanation for this?
Well, I know what your spiritual background is. I also think I'm correct in saying you don't practice a spiritual philosophy, do you?
Correct.
Yes, and I don't think it matters. There are so many people in the world that are trying to blame the Muslims. They're trying to blame the Jews. They're trying to blame conservative evangelical Christians. They're trying to blame everybody but the perpetrators, and the perpetrators are of all those religious or spiritual backgrounds. right now there are people that are trying to tie Trump to Netanyahu, but that's a waste of our time to even go there. The point is, it doesn't matter if somebody is identified as a Christian, a Buddhist, a Hindu, a Jew, a Khazarian, an agnostic, or an atheist. What identifies a person is what they're involved in and what they're working towards. And my sister, who would wrongfully, let me turn that off. I know who that was, and it's significant, but we'll cover that later.
Okay.
My sister, if she were asked point blank with a camera running, are you a Muslim, a Jew, an agnostic, an atheist, or a Christian? She would say she's a Christian. Well, I'm her only sibling, and I'm saying she is a member of the Synagogue of Satan, which is not Jewish people. They are people that claim they are Jewish people. So to implicate real Jewish people, and before we get wrapped up in spirituality, Jesus Christ was a Jew. So I would suggest that all the liars just stop focusing on spiritual or ethnic things and judge people by what their actions are. And the actions of my sister the actions of my sister will result in her death. And David can tell you how many years ago we came up, and it was him, not me, came up with the Sister Abel, Brother Cain. And at that time, he had just discovered the evil nature of my sister. And he said, one of you two is going to die. Well, one of us two is willing to die. I'm willing to die for what I say. I'll stand behind every word. I may have to give an alternate, not a changing definition, but a more well-couched definition. But my sister has been involved since no later than 1969, when she was recruited to join the Office of Economic Opportunity, even though she had no background to do so. That's the latest where she could have turned. The earliest, I believe, could have been while she was at George Washington University in Washington, D.C. between 64 and 66. More likely, it was when she was at the University of Hawaii, where she may well have been approached by Obama's grandmother, whose name was Madeline Dunham, I believe. But she worked at the East-West Center, and the East-West Center is a notorious hangout for the CIA, which is a British intelligence organization. It was a British intelligence agent named George H.W. Bush, who had a CIA pedigree, who told Jimmy Carter to put my sister in charge of the U.S. Senior Executive Service. I believe that the Senior Executive Service and Serco, which is a British corporation, which runs our military lock, stock, and barrel. More importantly, they run our patent office. I believe that Serco and the Senior Executive Service let me back up. I don't believe, I know 100% for sure that both Serco and the United States Senior Executive Service have been exposed to Donald Trump and 6 generals, 4 Marines, and 2 Army guys, all of them white hats. And this is a litmus test for our president. If in the next, we have a big parade coming up in November. It's a parade that Donald Trump is putting on in Washington, D.C. It's being characterized as a victory parade. I believe that's exactly what it is. And I'm going to go out on a limb and say that the United States of America, as a free and sovereign nation, which we have not been up until January 20th of 2017, when G.H.W. Bush's greasy little fingerprints were taken off the years 1981 to 2017. We've not been a free nation. We've been a slave plantation that's been controlled by elements of the Crown agents, the UK royals. And by the way, I think that Queen Elizabeth II understands this now, and I think she's more than willing to distance herself from the criminal and evil history of some of the UK monarchs, but also the Jesuits at the Vatican. And most people that are Catholic are thinking I'm slamming Catholics, Catholicism, or the Vatican. No, I'm not. The Jesuits at the Vatican are not spiritual. They are military and intelligence people and they've been busted by Able Danger. Over to you, Jason.
It's a lot to absorb there, Field. Now, I certainly had no idea that we were going to go to the senior executive service, but this is definitely a topic that's come up quite a lot. And I know that you have reiterated just now something that you stand by. We've heard from Robin Gritz, and now I've also heard from Kevin Shipp that they both think that SES is merely a pay grade within the government. They've both shared stories with me of people who are part of the SES that have been very helpful to them in their whistleblowing activities. And so I'm faced with this conundrum when I have two people who I trust who are on opposite sides of an issue that I know nothing about. I can't offer any useful opinion or experience-based information on SES because I never heard of it, Field, before our first conversation. Now, I will say everything that you have told me, and David, that at first seemed fantastic even to me, has been borne out by facts, evidence. I think that this report on the Malaysian air flight, what I read, it's a very extensive report, as you pointed out, but what I read said that there was evidence that the controls were taken over, but it was unclear how. And
Yes.
in my view, that was sort of amazingly compelling evidence that your statements about Boeing uninterruptible power autopilot and other things that you've been talking about related to that, they seem to be confirming that. And there's certainly no reason to believe that such a technology would not exist. It doesn't seem beyond the scope of what would be possible. So I'm interested to see how Robin Gritz or Kevin Shipp would come to have such a vastly different opinion or viewpoint on SES than you do. And I wonder if it's not got to do with compartmentalization. Is it possible that there are people within the SES who don't know about the evil plans of the directors of the SES? Because in the case of Kevin Shipp, of course, there was a point in time where he joined the CIA thinking it was a good and noble agency, but of course he's learned quite the opposite is true.
Can I respond to that?
Please do.
Well, let's take the example of Oliver Buck-Revell, who got to SES grade 6, which is a very high grade, and I think he was the Deputy FBI Director for Counterterrorism and Counterintelligence. So very obviously he would have an inside opportunity to set up what is known as a man-in-the-middle attack. And I think the point is, as I understand it, the SES is a community of about 7,000 to 8,000 people of the top grade, and they sit between cabinet positions and the rank and file in every government department, including the Department of Commerce, which of course has underneath it the Patent Office. Mm-hmm. So now Oliver Buck-Revell, in his wisdom, apparently took his son and daughter-in-law off the tarmac before they boarded, or would have boarded, Pan Am 103, which was blown up over Lockerbie.
Right, and blamed on Libya.
Sorry?
Blamed on Libya, right?
Yeah, blamed on Libya. And this is a classic example, I believe, of the use of this meta network, if you will, the AWACS Weapons Director Network, where you can switch from a simulated attack to a live fire. What I understand is the Pan Am 103, after it passed and Field can explain what that is, a beacon that were initially, I believe, was invented by Henry Ford, it's a sort of 1926 technology that allowed more precise navigation around airfield. But apparently over that beacon, and Field can jump in here if I got it wrong, it's normal for the pilot to switch frequencies. And the device inside the Pan Am 103 was triggered to go off on a certain frequency that the pilot switched into. Now, if you had inside knowledge of this, you could actually engage in some very lucrative death pool betting, because an insider would know the precise time when the bomb went off, and presumably all the passengers on the plane were killed. And this has proven, I believe, to be a very powerful method of laundering money, where you can move, you can place your dirty money on the outcome of the event using a patented device invented by a guy called Lutnick, Howard Lutnick.
Yeah.
And Howard Lutnick was the chief executive officer of Cantor Fitzgerald on the morning of 9/11, who was actually delivering his child to school that day, and interestingly left 658 of his colleagues, including his brother, to get vaporized at the top of the North Tower.
And a
now,
friend of mine.
I would think that's sufficient. Go ahead.
And a friend of mine.
Well, now, coming back to my the attachment that I sent to you in today's post,
Yes.
which is entitled Hawkins CSI 6, Crowd Scene Investigation 6. This is my attempts to develop this storyboard approach for injured communities to understand what has been done to them and to develop a remedy in terms of a wrongful death claim for wrongful deaths associated with the negligent, reckless, willful, or fraudulent use of patented devices in the custody of companies like Serco and its investment banker N.M. Rothschild. And the important thing, what I believe I can contribute, Field has his unique knowledge about flying events. What I think I want to do with these storyboard approaches is help communities understand the mechanism of the crime going through the 6 stages, which is in Act 1 would be the script and the spot, that is the spotting of the particular target and the time that you're going to hit it. Act 2 would be the shoot and the snuff, and I'll come to that in a minute with respect to Freescale. And Act 3 would be the spinning and spoliation of evidence, which of course is a felony, which entitles you to an aggressive inference of guilt. May I just mention the patents that might have been used in the shooting and the snuffing of passengers on MH Malaysian Airlines 370 and 17?
Please do.
And the Freescale technicians. Over to you.
Yes, please.
Okay, so Act 2, it looks at shooting and snuffing. Now, apparently the damage associated with the alleged missile attack on MH17 is consistent with the use of a proximity fuse. And for myself as an engineer, this is fascinating because then you have the possibility of looking at the DNA of some of these inventions. So if you Google BAE Systems PLC proximity fuse, you'll notice that the priority for that patent was 1998. And it was granted in 2004, which is there's a 6-year delay between filing the application and its publication. And I believe this is consistent with what is known in the patent office as a continuation, a submarining fraud. That is to say, you file the patent secretly. And I think it's very important to Americans to understand the history of the Alien Property Office in Chicago in the custody of Northern Trust, which is the bank that lent Obama a great deal of money to buy his mansion, and I believe gave him $250,000 in a speaking engagement. But with Northern Trust as the alien property custodian, not only for World War II, but for World War I, the Chicagoans, or the more corrupter versions of the Chicagoans, would have the ability to browse through the patent office and find a German patent or an Italian patent or whatever, or a Turkish patent that might be incorporated in a patent pool for, let's say, the beginning of World War II. Let me give an example of a specific patent. The proximity fuse that was invented by the British for the use in a much more accurate method of bringing down aircraft, because the proximity fuse would emit radio signals, and that would be returned to the receptor, and you could actually detonate the explosives in the missile when you're within, say, 7 feet of the target, which is a lot more effective than just, firing at random in the general direction of the oncoming aircraft. Well, did you know that the MH17 is alleged to have been brought down by a missile carrying a proximity fuse? And they judged that by the shrapnel in the fuselage, and I believe some bits in the bodies of the pilots. But if you Google proximity fuse, BAE systems, you'll find a perfect match to the description that we have of the crash of MH17. And as Field points out, well, it's not just Field, but apparently the rebel commander, when he arrives at that crime scene, says that the bodies were rotten. Let me give you another patent that I think is very interesting.
What is
you
the
and I have covered
significance of
before.
the bodies being rotten, David?
Sorry?
What is the significance?
Decomposed.
Oh, right, same thing, isn't it? I mean,
But
something's
why?
decomposed.
How does that lead us to the BAE systems proximity fuse?
Well, the plane was brought down by a proximity fuse missile, right? Because looking at the shrapnel, it had to be within sort of 7 feet when the explosion went off. And the nature of the explosion, it's a very characteristic sort of radial blast of shrapnel. So they looked at the fuselage and they matched that with a missile carrying a proximity fuse.
Okay.
When you look at the bodies on the ground being rotten or decomposed, if you will, this is consistent with the bodies of the prostitutes at the pig farm in British Columbia, where I believe Christine Marcy would use her Conair transportation system to fly various, how shall I put this politely, sexually deviant guests up to British Columbia, check them into a 4-star or 5-star hotel, bus them out to the pig farm, which ran under the label Piggy Palace Good Time Society from 1996 to 2002, where between 50 and 100 First Nations prostitutes were slaughtered in front of an audience of about 1,700 to 2,000 people. And we think we live in a civilized space. When I arrived in British Columbia in 1992, I smelt I was arriving in the most corrupt jurisdiction in the world. I've worked in 5 continents, and I've been to a few notoriously corrupt or allegedly corrupt places, including, Nigeria and Indonesia, because there's a veneer of civilization in beautiful British Columbia. But now, did you know that Vancouver has the reputation, or Canada in general, but Vancouver in particular, of being a hub of money laundering, organized fraud, and violent terrorist acts?
I'm learning that from you guys. I did not know that, but I am learning it from you guys. Now, we're getting into a ton of information that is incredibly valuable. I just want to back us up for a moment because we are getting a bit short on time. And there was something that was said earlier about General Electric tricking Boeing. And I wanted to ask briefly how we came to that conclusion, because I think they might be working together. I've done a series of videos with Jan Weinberg called the Audacity Files that people can find in a playlist on Crowdsource the Truth. And Jan has done extensive research into the activities of Boeing and GE relative to the State Department and the Clinton Foundation. And what he found was that one of the people that he was communicating with had become actually an investor in Boeing in order to go to the annual shareholders meeting and specifically ask, this was Justin Danhoff of the National Center for Public Policy, he asked, I think it was, who was the CEO of Boeing? Maybe it was GE. He asked Immelt if they were going to release these emails, and he didn't say, what emails are you talking about? He said, no, we're not going to do that. I also want to add that Charles Ortel, who of course is a regular guest on Crowdsource the Truth and has his own show on Sundays called Sunday with Charles, Charles was basically the first person to begin investigating financial impropriety by General Electric. And for people who don't know this, Charles Ortel is a bulldog, and you do not want to mess with him. GE, just a little bit over a month ago in June, was removed from the Dow Jones Industrial Average. And although I'm no financial expert, I do believe they were the last remaining original component of the Dow. So there's been a substantial fall from grace, and it's not surprising that we're hearing further allegations from Field that General Electric has individuals within it that are highly corrupt.
Can I respond?
Please do.
Let's go back to that meeting on the 47th floor. When I said that there were shareholders there that represented 10 global custodians, and those global custodians had $100 trillion of assets under management, what that means is the global custodian will take the assets of a pension fund, like the one up here, BCIMC, which has $120 billion of assets under management on behalf of 400,000 public servants. That's a lot of money, Jason, $120 billion. And I can guarantee you that every trustee that is appointed to the board of BCIMC, none of them would have experience of that kind of money management in the international financial markets. So what they do is they hand over the voting rights or proxy rights to a global custodian, such as BNY Mellon. And BNY Mellon will go to the annual general meeting of the company, such as Boeing, and in their wisdom, they will either have been instructed by the trustees, like not to invent into anything nasty like oil production, which annoys the hell out of me because I spent 15, well, maybe 30 years in the oil industry. And let me tell you this, every engineer I met and every scientist, I believe, acted with total integrity. An engineer, basically, if they lie, the bridge falls down. Right. That's not true of lawyers. It's not true of accountants. It's not true of bankers. They can all lie and get away with it. But engineers are hostage to the laws of physics, right? Like myself. So when we talk about Boeing or General Electric having responsibility for this, when you go to the annual general meeting, I think the Japanese have mastered this. There are various ways of terrifying directors into doing something that they would not, if they weren't being terrified, do. And of course, those are, I forget the name for it, these are the criminal organizations or gangs in Japan. Well, if you think there's any different in Vancouver or in New York, I've got, some real estate in Florida to sell you. You've got a criminal network that I believe is based on Christine Maas's development of the Con Air SWAT team principle, where she can fly in some really, really nasty people into a crime scene before the crime occurs and fly them out again. I think the technical term is exfiltration, framing a large corporation as being guilty by virtue of association. Field earlier mentioned the Federal Bridge Certification Authority. Yes. There are 4 major defense contractors in the Federal Bridge Certification Authority: Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, Raytheon, and Boeing. The signals, the timing signals for any kind of common use of those assets in theoretically in the custody of the big defense corporations comes from the United Kingdom Ministry of Defense and the NPL, the National Physical Laboratory cesium fountain clock, which was the first precision clock to be used in GPS. Any one of these missions has to require total synchronization between the elements or the assets of the 4 big defense contractors. The 4 big defense contractors have been infiltrated by Christine Massey through what is known as the Small Business Administration Mentor-Protege Program. So on 911, there were countless protege companies that had borrowed money through Christine Massey's Accelerated Loan Guarantee Program, where a bank approached by, sometimes I facetiously say, a company owned by a black one-legged lesbian, and you know, I'm a nice guy, Jason. I have got nothing against black one-legged lesbians, but I object to them weaponizing their disadvantages against people like me or you or Field, right? But I'm joking apart. The point is, she had access to loan money and the ability to liquidate any one of these small business companies that would have been embedded in Boeing, Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, and Raytheon. So she basically weaponized the Small Business Administration. She was the chief operating officer, and I believe she was camped out in building number 7, looking over the scene of carnage on the morning of 911 with her lesbian girlfriend, Leonora Guaria, who was the chief operating officer of the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission that was hammering large corporations because there weren't enough, again, black one-legged lesbians on the board of directors. Over to you.
That's interesting that you bring up the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, because this immediately, see, the thing that I find so fascinating about the journey that I've set upon, I don't have your background, David, as an engineer. I don't have Field's aviation background. I didn't, know nearly as much as I do even now about the government and politics and all this stuff until I started doing this for the past year. But when you mentioned the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, I immediately think of Robin Gritz, who filed an EEO complaint for her situation there at the FBI, and of course Laurel Everly, who worked as an EEO auditor, I believe. And coincidentally, it's LGBT month, so perhaps there are amputees within this administration who we could get onto the show. Now, gentlemen, we're past our hour here, so there's so much that we could talk about, and I do need to prepare for my 3 p.m. show with Larry Nichols. So I would ask both of you if there's something else that you'd like to share with us to sort of wrap up this segment, and perhaps we should do another one very soon. Why don't we start with Field, if there's anything else you'd like to share?
Yes, I'd like to share a couple things. Number one, General Electric did it. Number two, I'm going to read you a letter, but I will not tell you who this letter is from. It just came in 4 minutes ago.
Okay.
Hello, Field. Not sure if you saw this story in the Times yesterday about the flight. It mainly says nobody knows a thing, but there is a link to the 495-page official report that came out yesterday that also says nobody knows a thing. I'm looking forward to start building the treatment and script for the documentary. As soon as I receive your document, we will jump on getting everything arranged for your sign-off and then filming, editing, and packaging for the November deadline. I also made some inquiries about a private launch. Now, both of you guys listen to this. I also made some inquiries about a private launch in boutique cinemas throughout the United States. I will send you more information after I have all the figures together. Okay, well, that sort of blends what I want to do, which is the documentary, and what you guys want to do, which is theaters. And apparently, somebody I'm working with thinks there's some opportunity in boutique cinemas. So please don't express an opinion who I got that from. It doesn't matter, and it's private. But right. My conclusion is the Malaysian 495-page report is utter bullshit, and the truth will be out no later than November. Over to you, gentlemen.
David, closing remarks?
Yes, I believe that the passengers of MH Flight 370 were taken into a hangar on Diego Garcia, British Indian Ocean Territory, which is controlled through the British police, but it's an American military base. And they were progressively shot with these biological bullets in front of the appalled other passengers until certain people promised that they'd keep their mouths shut. And others were maybe left to die, and others, I can't prove that, were given $1 million and told to change their name and go back into Malaysia or China or wherever they came from. And the purpose of that was to terrify the Freescale directors and prevent them from exposing the use of various patented devices in stealth technology, for example, by Serco and its investment banker N.M. Rothschild. So I do believe there was a high-value targeted hit of people on MH Flight 370. And at the end of the day, when a whole number of people had died, they shoveled them into the cargo hold. They collected their passports, or had collected their passports, and they put those in bags. So when the rebel commander arrives at the crime scene in Donetsk in Ukraine, he finds piles of fresh passports. Well, of course, any legitimate passengers would be carrying the passports on them. They wouldn't be together, brand new passports, undamaged in the crash. So I believe that this was a high-value target event embedded in a mass casualty event as cover. Over to you.
Wow. You know, I've been searching throughout this broadcast for the Freescale semiconductor patent that would list Jacob Rothschild, but I've been unable to find that. I don't know why that is.
It doesn't exist. It doesn't exist.
I can tell you why. It's been bleached from the cyber world, just like my sister, Christine Marcy, has been bleached. And if you want to prove that, after your next guest, Google my name and my sister's name. I'll probably have 35 million hits, and my sister will probably have 300,000. I don't know. I don't give a rat's ass. But David, you're forgetting that we've gone on record for years as saying the ATI killed the people, and it was not. They did not arrive on Diego Garcia alive. They were deader than a doornail due to the ATI. And Jason, I will send you the ATI patent. And I can guarantee you, and I'm betting my life, that there's no person on earth that can prove me wrong saying that the passengers were killed shortly after the aircraft went off course between Agari and Baitad, and the ATI did it, period. No exceptions.
ATI is the, what is it?
They introduced colorless, tasteless, odorless gas into the cabin pressure system of any pressurized airliner, which is 100% of them, and it can either calm people down, put them to sleep, or kill them. And David, you might have forgotten, but you and I have been saying for 12 years almost that ATI was used on 9/11, and it was in fact used on Malaysia 370, and all of the victims, the corpses of Malaysia 370, were put on the airframe of 370, flown to Amsterdam with piloted human pilots up front. From Amsterdam to Donetsk, Ukraine, it was flown as a drone, and they tried to destroy the evidence, meaning the airframe and the corpses. Unfortunately, somebody imputed a delay in the detonation signal to Smacksonic. Over to you, Jason.
What does that ATI stand for, Field?
Air Tranquil Infuser or Injector, and I will send you the, there you go, there you just went by it, Air Tranquilizing Injector. And the way to explain this to your audience is if you gave, let's say, Jason Goodman and the captain of the flight a half a thimbleful of bourbon, it wouldn't affect them. If you gave them a cupful of bourbon, it would affect them over time, a very short time. If you gave them a gallon of bourbon, it would kill them. The passengers of MH370 arrived at Diego Garcia dead, period, and I'll argue that with anybody on Earth, and win.
Can I respond?
Yeah.
Please.
Yeah, so there is a story about a cell phone held by one of the passengers where he was apparently geographically located on Diego Garcia, and he was sending a message. Apparently he says, I work for IBM and I've managed to hide my cell phone in my arse during this attack. So
he said anus.
Well,
that's probably a detail that doesn't matter.
Yeah. Let me just dispel that immediately.
It's called keystering, gentlemen.
The person who reported that was Sarah Botch, B-A-J-C, and she is also a paid shill, and I have communicated with her, and you cannot take anything she says as the truth, period.
Well, let's look at this for 1 minute, because right now I am showing a patent US 3841328A. So this is a patent that's been granted by the US Patent Office in 1974, and it's held by someone named Jay Jensen. It's a passenger disabling apparatus mounted in and under an airplane seat and remotely actuated by a pilot or a crew member for disabling an airplane hijacker. Why wouldn't this be used on 9/11? Are these present in every commercial jet, Field?
The ATI and the BUAP are married to each other. When the BUAP is activated, it does two things. Immediately, it shuts down every communication feature of the targeted aircraft. And secondly, it arms the ATI. So what I'm telling you is from 1989 with Airbus, 1995 with Boeing, anytime they take control remotely of an aircraft, they shut down the communications, and that's consistent with every one of these incidences. And they also arm the ATI. In the case of Malaysia 370, I will go to Malaysia, I'll go to Russia, I will go to the Netherlands, I'll go anywhere, and I will argue this, and I will win. Why will I win? It's not arrogance, it's not boastfulness, it's because they destroyed the evidence, and they cannot prove me wrong. So they killed people between Agari and Baitad on MH370, and the people that controlled that, and let's just say who that was, it was the people that had custody of the airframe from the 8th of March. Those countries include the UK, the US, and Israel, period.
Wow. It's amazing, and it's yet another example of one of these statements, Field, where I think most people hear you say everybody on the plane was killed with an odorless, tasteless gas. Most people would just dismiss that as absurd, but then yet here we see documentation from the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office that exactly that has existed since 1974. So it's absolutely fascinating. I want to thank my guests, Able Danger representatives Field McConnell and David Hawkins. You can learn more about Able Danger and read more detail about everything we've been discussing at abledanger.org, where you can download intelligence reports and read more about all of this stuff. You can support Able Danger's work on patreon.com. And David, are we ready to discuss what we're planning for patreon.com?
Oh, well, yes, the exact mechanism of how that's set up is still a little vague in my mind, but I do believe there's an opportunity for me with you to share with your audience or step your audience through one of these CSI storyboards, even if it's online and on the internet, and actually demonstrate how, in principle, you could develop a movie or a theater that would allow what I call an injured community to put together an argument in the civil courts and not the criminal courts, and a claim for damages under a wrongful death suit, which is a preponderance of evidence or a balance of probability argument. So you only need 51% of the evidence to indicate the negligent, reckless, willful, or fraudulent use of patented devices to recover damages. So I would like to think that you, Jason, myself, maybe some other talk show hosts, we can interactively with your audience walk them through the logic of a 3-act play or a 3-act movie divided into 6 phases of the crime, which is script and spot for Act 1, shoot and snuff, shoot meaning essentially having a camera trained on the victim as someone fires a biological bullet into them, and then they bet on how long it'll take them to die. But maybe the most crucial act is Act 3, and I'm starting to learn the language, probably you know more about this than I do, of a plot point. But in Act 3, we're talking about the patented devices using to spin a myth into the mainstream media or spoliate the evidence. Now, you and I have discussed the Kinetic North America's patent for social engineering protection appliance.
Yes.
This is the most sinister technology because it can hoover up, if that's the right word, all emails that they or their custodians deem to be criminal or malicious. So for all I know, lots of people think I'm maliciously going after, again, sorry, I'm being facetious, black one-legged lesbians, where I'm sure if I met one, I'd really be able to establish some kind of rapport, albeit that I'm a two-legged white Caucasian. The problem is you cannot give, you're back to George Orwell, I think, in the Ministry of Truth. If you allow a private company that has actually got deep affiliations with the United Kingdom Ministry of Defence, it operates the Boscombe Down airfield, which is about a 10-minute drive from where those perfume bottles containing Novichok were released. So I believe there was a Con Air SWAT team who flew in to Boscombe Down, handled by Kinetic, popped in some or left some sample that this guy was actually gave to his girlfriend, Dawn Sturgis. And let me give you an example. Dawn Sturgis, his partner, works for Boscombe Down Kinetic.
Wow.
Right? So he had the opportunity to provide her with the perfume bottle with Novichok in it. Anyway, it just leads on and on. But I think if we have an interactive show, Jason, where you and I can, with your wonderful gift at being able to put up images that are relevant to the patent, so people can get additional credibility, because I can talk about the patent, but again, just as you said earlier, it's easy to dismiss Field McConnell talking about the ATI that would kill all the passengers, but when you put the patent description up on your show, people can start seeing we're actually talking about real live systems, and in the custody, I would say, of the world's leading organized crime group, which is the Con Air SWAT team network assembled by Field's sister. Over to you.
Absolutely. It's been a fascinating discussion, gentlemen, and we will have another very soon. I want to thank my guests, Field McConnell and David Hawkins, and I will speak to you both very soon. I want to thank everyone for watching. Please be back at 3 p.m. in just 40 minutes. Larry Nichols will be talking about the criminal prosecution of Paul Manafort. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you, Jason.
Thank you very much.